are live. Again, okay, guys, welcome back, everyone, to the Solvable Mysteries Podcast, episode number 31. My name is Juras. I'm joined by Glenn. How are you, man? Are you ready to discuss this week's topic?
Yeah, it's funny. We just said in the last episode that we did so much California stuff, but
Oh my God.
yeah, California seems to have
Taking
just given
over.
us a lot of taken over our show lately. But I mean, how can we help it? I mean, it's where a lot of stuff is happening.
It seems
So
like it, yeah.
yeah,
Okay, so today we're gonna be talking about, I guess, the death of Kobe Bryant. I guess that's a good way to word the case, because essentially, as we all know, Kobe recently passed away in a helicopter crash, and for me, as I guess, casual. A person who has a casual level of knowledge in terms of aviation and helicopters and planes. For me, it just seemed like a normal crash, and I didn't really look into the details. But for someone like you who is really into aviation, helicopters, stuff like that, you seem to have different opinions that. From the ones that the media sort of stated, right, about this whole incident.
yeah, it's kind of a weird situation where I find myself at odds with like even members of my own family about just opinions about what happened, and certainly what we've been hearing in the media. Now, I will make a big disclaimer that I'm not a pilot. I've never been a pilot. The closest I've come to flying anything has been flying pretend airplanes on my computer. I think I've always been fascinated with aviation and aerospace. I've always flown, like as long as I've had a computer. I've been pretty interested in flying pretend simulated airplanes and helicopters on those computers. And while I won't claim to be one of the most like elite gamers or anything like that as far as that goes, and certainly there's lots of people that know way more about both helicopters and airplanes. I've always been fascinated by the topic. I used to really love going to airports. I still have fun going to Van Nuys Airport, which actually will come up in this conversation today, and just watching airplanes take off and land, and using my scanner and just watching that. So it is funny, like often when I do get the opportunity to take a commercial airline flight somewhere, I actually know what they're doing now. Like, so like I'll be sitting there in the plane and I'll watch what's going on with the wing, or like, kind of look at where we are in the map, or even if I can't see the map, the in-flight map, just feeling like, oh, we're gaining altitude, we're losing altitude. Kind of know like actually what's going on, and when I see what's going on below me, even if I'm not listening to the radio, sometimes you can listen to the pilots talk to air traffic control on kind of the internal radio channels in the airplane. Even when I'm not listening to that, I actually have a pretty good idea. Yeah. So I actually know what's going on there, and I think since then, listening to podcasts like the Fighter Pilot podcast, which I now have a kind of an association with, it just has given me even more of a sense, I think, for what goes on. So yeah, so this is a big long disclaimer that what I'm going to say in no way is me representing myself as an expert, and you should just take this with a grain of salt, that whatever we say on our show is just an opinion. So don't let it affect your opinion of buying Sikorsky stock, and nothing I'm going to say here is anything that hasn't been made public already. So I don't have any secret inside sources. Everything I say is going to be just freely available through news media and through some of the stuff we're going to show you today.
Seems like you came prepared, Glenn.
I hope so.
Okay, so I guess before we actually get into the nitty-gritty of the actual, what actually happened with the Sikorsky helicopter that Kobe was in at the time of his death, I guess we can sort of, talk a little bit about who Kobe Bryant was, and what he actually meant for you, and for California essentially, and for someone like me who is an international, person in terms of looking at it from the U.S. perspective, and I guess an international fan of basketball, and what he actually meant for for me and for people in my country. My country is really big on basketball, so I guess to start off the podcast, I just want to mention that Kobe actually was a really big icon here in Lithuania, and his name was usually mentioned when we were like doing regular my bad stuff just in school, like when we were like I guess throwing like rolled up paper, papers in the garbage bin and things like that. Everyone was like yelling Kobe, or someone like threw like a bottle into like a garbage bin or something like that, and they actually like were successful in that throw. Everyone would like yell Kobe, even like the video games that we play, when someone like throws a grenade or something like that, and you scored, and people always yell Kobe. So Kobe was synonymous with like making a shot, whatever the shot was, like not even in basketball, like whatever the shot was. If you made a shot happen, you have to yell Kobe. So that's how iconic he was, and everyone knew about him here in Lithuania. I feel like it was just as big of a shock to us here, just as big of a shock as it was to the general populace in America, So really felt like we knew the guy, and yeah, it was really unfortunate. So I guess you are like the local resident in California on this podcast, so could you like talk a little bit about like what Kobe actually meant for the city and how big of a personality he was in Los Angeles, essentially?
Yeah, and I'll rewind it a little bit just to give you a sense of. So I'm a tall guy, so as like a tall teenager, you're kind of expected to play basketball, whether or not you like to play basketball. It's just it's just the way it goes. So like I think as I got into my early teens, I started to have more awareness of our Los Angeles Lakers, which is, I live in Los Angeles, and that's our main team. And I think in the 80s, the Lakers, used to battle it out with the Celtics a lot, and they were at least one of the strong contenders for the finals. But, the Celtics had done a pretty good job, but then we ended up having people like Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So when Magic Johnson got HIV and then dropped out of basketball for a while, and even when he got back in, he was never quite the same, right? Like that was sort of him in his prime. I think that was the period when like the Bulls took over, and obviously with Michael Jordan, who is a legend unto himself. The Bulls,
of course,
and just dominated for like the early 90s going into the late 90s. So once Shaq hit the scene, and Shaq wasn't even in LA when he started, right? He was over in Orlando, right?
Yeah, he was in the Magic. Yeah,
he got drafted over there. So like even then, I think for a while it was like sort of our team just sort of languished, and what's weird about Los Angeles is we actually have two basketball teams, because we have the Clippers as well.
Yeah.
But nobody watches them.
No,
so,
Clippers were, until now, right now Clippers seem to be back up, but back in the day Clippers were really, really bad. I feel like they had like the worst record of all time at one point for like a team. So the Clippers were down on their luck for sure.
It's hard to be the B team in Los Angeles, right?
And their owner was like a bit of a scumbaggy person, like I forgot his name. It's like Donald something.
Oh yeah, I can't remember. Yeah, but they were, like I said, they were just challenged. So then all of a sudden it was kind of weird to have first we got Shaq, and then we got Kobe, and Kobe was like this, except I guess even to for someone like me that didn't follow basketball that much other than it was our local team, knowing that like Kobe had basically come to the pros straight from high school, which was already pretty unusual. So that I think was demonstrative of what a talented
Yeah,
individual
he
he was.
actually
What a
skipped.
phenomenon.
He skipped university to go to the LA Lakers. And back in the day,
Yeah.
you could actually do this. Now the rules have changed. You have to have at least 1 year of college basketball before you can get drafted, or you have to be like a professional somewhere before. Or I'm not really certain how that works, but you can't just come straight out of high school into the NBA. It's a big scam. It's a big NCAA basketball
Yeah.
scam to get more people, to get like more great talents into the university game. So it's a big scam, but it is what it is. Yeah,
There was yeah, it is right. There's I forget what are those? What's that family? Lavar.
LeVar Ball
You know.
and Lonzo
Oh
Ball,
yeah.
Lamelo
Yeah,
Ball.
yeah.
They
I
played
watched
basketball
just
in Lithuania for a season.
yeah, yeah. I saw that they came over for a while and they had it was interesting because I mean just as a side note, someone like me who doesn't even really follow basketball that much, I caught what I guess was like one of the most famous high school games ever with them playing. Do you know what I'm talking about? This family of just I'll have to find it for you later, but
The
it's kind of
Bulls,
amazing. Yeah, yeah, the balls
of
like all
course. Yeah.
three of you know what I'm talking about. All three of the brothers playing that one school for the national championship and just like winning by like 50 points or something ridiculous.
Oh yeah.
It's I mean what a video, but yeah, so it's yeah, like you said, it's kind of amazing. You have these people that these players that can be so good at such a young age and just like it, just have it be so obvious to the people that make these kind of decisions that they're so strong. So yeah, I mean like I said, fortunate for Kobe. And yeah, Kobe became this international brand. So not only was he able with Shaq and the rest of the Lakers to bring us um championships here.
Multiple
Yeah,
championships. Yeah.
the famous three-peat. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
which I definitely remember that. That was a big deal, and we had parades and stuff. Yeah, I mean, we were really blessed, I guess. And then it turned out he was also like a pretty good guy. I mean, I've been watching just like I said, random basketball stuff where you hear about. It turns out some of these other famous basketball players were not such nice people in their personal lives. I mean, case in point, Carl Malone apparently had kind of a troubled family history with some of the kids that he
Hmm.
created, and that's an interesting story. And even Michael Jordan, who is such an amazing brand and amazing player and legend,
Oh yeah.
even he is apparently not such a nice guy in person.
Oh yeah. I've heard
Yeah,
stories that Michael Jordan actually could be a problematic personality
yeah,
outside of
yeah.
the uh, public PR that he portrays. But he's a legend, obviously. He
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it doesn't take away from that, I guess.
of
Yeah,
course.
definitely. But it was so fascinating. So that's why I think when like a player like Kobe that was so internationally known in an era where, to your point, when basketball started really becoming an international sport that other countries started getting really good at. So like you and I have talked about this off off the air, how like Lithuania now has some like really amazing players
Oh
that
yeah.
are definitely pro quality and in fact do become pro players. So but Kobe was like almost like the ambassador for the sport in a lot of ways during this period, and would be like if there would be one player that people in China or Japan or Lithuania or any other part of the world would
Hmm.
recognize. I mean, it's kind of funny when you tell me that everybody was kind of talking about Kobe like how when I was a teenager we would talk about Jordan or Air
Oh
Jordan.
yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think the since the information age has started, we sort of didn't really, Michael Jordan didn't really go mainstream internationally when he was, I think, playing basketball as much as Kobe did. I feel like Kobe, because he was like the guy during the internet age. So Michael Jordan came a little bit before that. So I think Michael Jordan only became like this huge thing, this huge personality after his career ended. I feel like and Kobe actually was, we saw him winning titles like here in Lithuania. So and people in China and all over the world, yeah, like if someone has to mention like an iconic basketball player, I think they would either go with Michael Jordan, or Kobe, at this point. So he was like, in terms of like his actual skill set, I feel like he is, at least for me personally, he's the best shooting guard. Maybe like with Jordan, like they share like this the best two shooting guards of all time for me. I feel like he had the ability to create his own shot like no one else. So yeah, and he was a really clutch player. He would, if the time was winding down and the Lakers were down by two, you already know who to give the ball to. It was never a question who was going to be taking that last shot. And it was never any doubt that Kobe was going to take that shot, and he actually was making that shot quite often. So he was an amazing player, and it's really unfortunate what happened. So I guess if you want to like mention anything about him as a person, as a player, before we actually get into your line of expertise.
No. So I mean, yeah. I think that's a good summary. I think you hit it right on the nose. That I mean, I think my perspective of him outside of probably how big a brand he is, you probably have a better perspective because, like you said, Jordan, in my eyes, because I was sitting here in the middle of the pre-internet kind of media propaganda attack, right? Like Jordan was marketed very heavily to us. There wouldn't be anybody that wouldn't know who Michael Jordan was, and they had the shoes, and even the shoes they're still so sought after.
Oh yeah. He gets like I've heard like 90 million or like 100 million every year from Nike just for the shoes. Yeah, so
just nice. I mean, so I mean, from that perspective, he was always so huge. But it is very interesting for me to hear that about Jordan, that he was not as big, as important to I guess the rest of the international community, other than and like I think to your point, he was sort of retiring around the time the internet was really getting going. So so that was a good handoff for Kobe. So then when I think about it, I'm trying to think like, not that I really know, but I feel like I don't ever really remember any major tragedies in basketball before Kobe, because the only thing I can think of was the Magic Johnson getting HIV was kind of tragic in a way that at the time he got HIV, it was a death sentence, but he miraculously has just seems healthier than ever. And Michael Jordan's father, that happened, and that was everybody. You know what I mean? That was a huge news event, at least here in the States. I mean, like, how dare they do that to this guy's father? Made him retire for a year, and he was out of it was sort of like it changed the face of basketball. But yeah, for someone, I think the Kobe thing, the kind of reaction I saw from like my peers and my friends and people I worked with, like there's like genuine like anguish over this. I mean, people. I mean, I have like people that have like other men that have told me that they cried about it that day. That they're like Lakers fans that were like, no, they like that day they cried. Yeah, so
yeah, I mean,
so it's a big deal.
Even myself, like I felt really, really bad when I heard the news. So I can remember like exactly what I was doing. It's going to be one of those things where you sort of remember what you were doing when you heard the news. So it was like a really impactful thing for me as well. I didn't cry, but like, yeah, it was like, whoa, you were like feeling strange for like a few days. It was so weird. The feeling was really weird.
It's a major loss, and then it almost like,
no doubt,
like the appreciation for how much he himself lost in terms of somebody who really had it made for the rest of his life, right? I mean, all he had to do was
plans as
just
well,
be him. Yeah, and he wasn't. It's true. He wasn't like running off and spending his money in fishing or something, or doing drugs. He was doing constructive things with his time. So yeah, it's as we get into what he was doing with his time, I mean, I think it'll make it even more agonizing. So, just to set the stage, how did Kobe even end up in helicopters in general was, I don't know if we talked about it that much on the show, but I've lived in Los Angeles my whole life, and I've had to work often it is the case that the job, for whatever career you pick here in Los Angeles, including professional sports,
Yeah.
you don't often live like the stadiums for professional sports, just like the workplaces that I've been at, haven't necessarily been in the places where you'd want to live. So especially when Kobe, like even though downtown LA now is a much more popular and much more affluent place than it used to be, the place where he played basketball games is still like in a pretty impoverished area, and it's certainly not a place that you would raise your family if you were a professional basketball player. So
You're
the
talking about
unfortunate
downtown LA, right?
downtown LA, yep, downtown LA is just it's better now. It's a lot better in the past, let's say like 10 years. And my sister lives down there now, so and she's a pretty well-to-do architect. So yeah, like things are better, but still like the schools and things, it just it's like more like I'm trying to think, like it's more like
But it sounds weird to me. Like, how can like the city center essentially around like the Staples centers? How could that area be like impoverished? It's really odd to me, because like here
yeah,
in Lithuania, like the city centers are like the nicest areas, and like the outskirts of the like main center get like a little bit worse and worse like the further you go.
yeah, it's interesting that America has kind of the opposite thing of what happens in Europe.
Hmm.
So London, downtown London is some of the most expensive real estate in the world, if
Oh
not
yeah.
the most, right?
Probably,
But
yeah.
like
Something like really high up there. Yeah.
yeah, especially with all the banking industry that's based out of there now. I think the city of London is even like its own like separate
Yeah, 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 yeah.
jurisdiction. It's like
It's something like it has like its own like
like a
regulating.
country or something.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really weird. Yeah.
So yeah, for some very very weird reasons, the United States is not like that. So the United States, though this is somewhat reversed, but the pattern in the United States was after World War II, as more Americans came back from the war, and you saw kind of a rising middle class, and you also saw the rising infrastructure for cars. There was a couple different things. There were a couple different forces at work, and I guess it's not worth going too deep into it. But there were a couple different forces at work that pushed Americans out of the cities, middle class Americans, so the middle class and the upper class,
Yeah.
out of the downtown area and into the suburbs. So it's exactly the opposite of what you'd see in like Paris or someplace like that, where the suburbs are associated with poverty and like sort of new arrivals and
Like not so
lower
much these
income.
days, but yeah, but back in the day, you could definitely see.
Yeah, especially like with all the riots and stuff they have out here. So yeah, so like that was there's different terms for it, but yeah, what you had was a combination of factors that made all of a sudden the outskirts of cities become the place you wanted to be, and not the middle of the city, which often was like crowded and not really built well. The infrastructure wasn't built well. There was higher crimes, so crime rates and things like that. And there's some other sociological factors that, like I said, we won't go into too much here. But yeah, so when I was growing up, downtown LA was not at all worth your time going down, except for just certain activities, like maybe a convention or things like that. But it is a very dangerous area, very high crime, especially back then. And it's only been in the past few years that's happened. The other thing that's, I think, specific about Los Angeles, but also some of the other big cities like Atlanta, is that Los Angeles, I think, is geographically, the county of Los Angeles might be the biggest county in the United States. It's very
I would
so
not be surprised. Yeah.
yeah. It's so like, even though New York is the biggest city, Los Angeles, I think, is the biggest land-wise. So New York is built up. You know what I mean? Like everything's up, everything's vertical in New York.
Oh yeah.
So they have a certain space, and it's very crowded. Los Angeles is built up to some extent, but Los Angeles is also built out. So a lot of the neighborhoods, like for instance, I live in a place called the San Fernando Valley that used to be farmland, 50, 60 years ago. And now is houses. It's been houses for 60 years, and like a lot of people, including famous and rich people, live out here. So in the case of Kobe, I think he lived out there in Orange County, which is sort of like not really Los Angeles. It's like Los Angeles adjacent. It's a more affluent part of Southern California. And the fact was, for him to take a car from the nice place that he lived, the mansion that he lived, or mansions that he lived in, to the basketball stadium would become a very painful thing. Even if you had a driver and you could sit in the back of like a town car or something like that.
Yeah,
I mean, I used to think,
time-consuming.
oh my gosh, yeah, you're just in traffic, and it's just horrible. Like I used to think, like if I was a rich person, I would probably get like an RV. Honestly, if I had to go commute back and forth and let somebody drive me, at least I would have a bathroom and like a table and like
Oh my
things to
God,
do.
it's real that bad?
Yeah, yeah, it's horrible. I mean,
Jesus.
my round trip, my daily round trip when I was commuting to downtown or other parts of the city has averaged between 2 to 3 hours a day, and then on some really
What
bad days,
the
yeah,
hell?
there have been days when like a bad accident would happen that would tie up the freeway or other things would go crazy. We even had at one point, we even had some traffic engineers who sabotaged the signals on purpose to mess up traffic about 12 or 13 years ago. So just things like that.
Whoa.
I've had days where I wasn't even sure that I was going to get home that night. That's how bad the traffic can get.
God
Yeah, I mean,
damn.
which like it starts to make you feel a little crazy because you're like, you start to have irrational fears about, like getting home. So, like for someone who's a wealthy professional athlete and a really important one like Kobe, like that doesn't make sense. So, there's helicopters, right? And the one thing that Los Angeles does have is it has a lot of rules about, especially big tall buildings actually have to have helicopter pads. And there's a hospital right down the street from me called Northridge Hospital, which has a helicopter pad. It's right by my kid's school. And like sometimes when I'm in my backyard, I'll see that helicopter, a couple times a week, a helicopter, who's trying to get somebody who's in medical trouble.
Yeah.
Like that's, time is money and time is life. So, yeah. So
Yeah.
like helicopters are a very strong part of our skies here, and our police department also makes very heavy use of helicopters.
I bet.
Yeah, we have. I mean, the LAPD probably has like 12 helicopters just by itself.
Jeez.
So
Jesus.
yeah,
That's crazy. Like we don't have that many in the Lithuanian military.
yeah. I mean, we have like our police and sheriff have like their own air force basically, as does
Jesus Christ.
the fire department as well. So yeah, I mean, and it's really important. So this is a long-winded way of introducing that. Kobe had gotten used to and gotten very comfortable with using helicopters as transportation. So even in his retirement, as he started doing these side projects and spending his time constructively, he has
Winning Oscars.
winning Oscars, and he had four children, right? Is that right?
I believe it was 4 children. Yes. Well, one of his youngest daughter at the time of his death was really, really young. She was only a few months.
An infant, yeah. So he had this sports academy that he had founded, and it was I think a way for him to work with young people, including his daughter, his 13-year-old daughter. He had this sports academy named was it Mamba Sports Academy?
I believe it was called that. Yeah, I haven't really looked into it that much. I'll try to find it somewhere. But yeah.
Yeah. So, he had the sports academy, and it was playing games up and down the Southland here. So, but by the Southland, I mean Southern California. So,
yes, it was called the Mamba Sports Academy, by the way. I have it right here. Yeah, it seems like it was essentially a sports academy for young people. So it's actually a really, really good thing that he was doing, for the community, right?
yeah, I'm gonna make a guess that it probably skewed towards, affluent folks like his family. His family's affluent, and it looks like the areas that they were playing the games in, both Orange County, but also in other places up and down the coast. So, like here's the thing is, once again, even on the weekends when there's not as much traffic, unless you're getting up really early in the morning. So like to go from where he was going to drive. So he had a game. They had a game in Newbury Park, which is actually, for me, not a really long drive. I could probably get from my house to Newbury Park, my house in Northridge, to Newbury Park. I could probably get there, maybe half an hour on like a weekend day, even during a weekday when there's no traffic. Before rush hour hits, you could probably get there 30, 35 minutes. But from where he was going,
Yeah,
all the
still a
way down,
long,
and
still a long time even for you, man.
yeah, even for me, it's a little bit of a drive. But for him, I mean, depending what time he left and whether anything went wrong on the freeway, because all it takes is one accident and it messes it all up. And he unfortunately was coming from a very busy part of the city where the traffic is really bad. So, or part of let's say the Southern California. So, I mean, for him to drive, like even someone wealthy like him who could have a driver in a limousine or something like that, town car, they're still looking at a drive that could be up to 2 hours, 3 hours
Oh my
each
God,
way.
like that's
Yeah.
insane when you think about it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So, he gotten in he has money, and money can save you time. So, he had this helicopter and he had a pilot. I believe he was leasing the helicopter. Or he had some kind of agreement
I mean,
with the leasing company.
the helicopter has like a Nike symbol. I mean, a
Yeah,
Nike
yeah.
symbol. So who knows?
Yeah, it's got his, and it's interesting because when you look at, there's a picture of this same helicopter from about 3 years ago. So it looks like whatever kind of his association was with this specific helicopter, it must have strengthened in the past 3 years, because the file picture on, I think our source is AirNav. There's a registration. FlightAware. The registration link for that has a picture where it didn't have this paint job yet, which was a little bit
Okay.
confusing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
there's
that's
if you go
interesting.
to that, if you go to the FlightAware registration page where it shows who
You
actually
sent me
officially
their
owned
link,
it.
right?
Yep, yep. It's
Okay.
one of the um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's on that. It's the other page. Yep, there we go. So you can see that's the file picture from only 3 years ago. Didn't have the nice paint job yet, so I don't know
It's
if
the same plane. The same
same as.
helicopter.
Yep, same.
Oh
So
wow.
the way you can tell is you can look at the numbers
Oh
on the
yeah.
back. So that 972 EX, which this is the way we I think pretty much the whole world tracks aircraft, is like they track aircraft like you track cars, like it has a VIN number basically,
Yeah.
and this is sort of the version of the VIN number. So
If
yes,
if I could just make
yeah.
a comment real quick, I would say that after the paint job, it looks a lot more modern. And when I was looking at it, like right now, it seemed like it was like a fairly, a modern new helicopter. I'm not saying that it's not modern or new, but when you look
Well,
at it from the Flight Aware website, it looks a little bit dated. Wouldn't you say?
yeah, yeah, I agree, and actually that's a good point, because like that paint job goes a long way, doesn't it? Because when you look at the actual information on it, it's a 1991 Sikorsky
1991.
7-76B. Yeah, yeah, and the aircraft actually, it was used, I think, before as I think it was a. Let's see. It was. Oh, here it goes. It was owned by the state of Illinois previously, where it was used to transport governors and other officials. So it was in good repair, I'm sure, since they were moving governors around in it. But it's still like an almost 30-year-old aircraft. So just
That's really odd.
whatever that's worth, and apparently it used to seat 12, and it was converted to seat 8 after this, I guess excluding the pilot, after the sale to Island Express. So Island Express is the actual owner in this case, and it sounds like no one is really sure whether he officially chartered it full time. But given, like you said, it's got his paint job on it, and I think it's got like the Nike symbol on it, and also like I don't know if that's his Mamba symbol, that weird little
Um,
three-cornered thing.
I'm not sure. I'm looking
Yeah.
at. Well, the Mamba symbol that's on his sports academy looks a little bit different. I'm not sure if
Okay.
this is because you can see like
What that thing is?
on his
Yeah.
like sports academy,
Oh yeah.
it's a
Yeah. So
little
I
bit
don't know.
different. So
Maybe it's some other sponsor. I wasn't entirely sure, but like, yeah, it looks
yeah,
it looks almost military. It's a very interesting I don't know why you'd actually want a camouflage paint job on an aircraft that needs to fly and be visible through LA airspaces, but that's what they did. So okay,
It looks cool. Like
yeah,
I'm gonna give it to whoever designed it actually looks a lot better to me, like visually, than it did before. You know, it looks a lot more modern. I guess if you're like flying around, you know how it looked originally. It really does seem dated. It would actually be weird to see Kobe getting out of this helicopter right here, because this looks something like out of Baywatch or something like that, you know, like back in the day. And
yeah,
and
yeah.
like when you get out of this one, it looks like it's like, you know, like really new. So yeah.
And the top speed of this model of helicopter is about 150 knots. So beyond that is when you get into kind of dangerous territory and you get out of what's called the flight envelope. So the
Okay.
safe flying. But that's not nothing. I mean that's as fast as that's faster than honestly some of the private propeller aircraft that you see with like fixed landing gear and stuff. This is a kind of a helicopter that it has retractable landing gear, so the wheels, meaning the wheels can go up
Hmm.
into the helicopter, and then they're not making wind resistance. So it's a fast helicopter. I mean, it's as fast as a helicopter would be
Good.
expected to be,
Okay. Yeah.
right? It's a sort of like it's like the Corvette of helicopters. It's
Right. Right.
it's when you need to get someplace in a hurry. So apparently, he was quite comfortable with using this for his transportation for games like this. He has the money, why not spend it? And well, they had a game, like I said, up there in Newbury Park. So that morning, this was like on I believe was it a Saturday morning, January 26th?
Can't tell you right now. I can look it up while
Yeah, let
you
me.
give us the lowdown.
Yeah,
I will
it
find
was
it.
a weekend morning. Sunday morning. That's
It
right.
was
That's
Sunday,
right.
right?
Sunday. Yeah. So they had a tournament going on, and the interesting thing is apparently before this, um, they had done this flight before. So where they're flying to is there's an airport past Newbury Park called Camarillo, and I've been there before. There's a couple of airports over there in Ventura County, just like Newbury Park is in Ventura County. So it's a little bit past. So what they were going to do is essentially fly to this other small airport, just a bit past, and then they would backtrack. And the backtrack drive is only about 10-15 minutes, so it's not
Hmm.
long. So they would save a lot of time doing this. But what happened was, and I remember the conditions being like this that day when it happened, just looking outside and seeing how foggy it was. Um, there was what we call a marine layer and some low clouds. So the marine layer is sort of like, I guess you'd think of it as sort of a really low fog that we get. We don't get a lot of bad weather here in LA, but we do get, it gets foggy. We're next to the ocean, and the combination of the sun and weird weather next to the ocean will
Hmm.
make for some foggy days, even in the city and in the valley. So even though, if you look at a map of Los Angeles is kind of like these different pockets of like, there's like mountains that crisscross across Los Angeles. So when I say I live in the valley,
Hmm.
I live I live in the valley, and this is where Kobe flew through and eventually died in. I live in a valley that's ringed by the Santa Monica Mountains to the south of me, in the Hollywood.
Something like this, right? I
Yep,
believe.
yep. And these are the kind of hills that I've grown up with. And actually, my parents live up in the hills as well. So yeah,
Looks amazing.
our city is divided by, right through the center of the city is the Santa Monica Mountains and the Hollywood Hills, and north of that, the north end of the valley, we have another set of like the San Bernardino Mountains and the Chatsworth Hills, and so it's when you're flying through Los Angeles, it is actually a little bit tricky. It's not like some other cities that are relatively flat, where you can just fly easily from one side to another. If you're flying at all through parts of California, you're dealing with a lot of things. So that's one thing. Here's the other thing. Besides the weather and the mountains, you also have, frankly, because we're such a big city and we were such a big aviation city going into World War II,
Hmm.
a lot of the
Yeah.
military airports. So just think, World War II happened right when aviation was really just getting going, right? So
Oh yeah.
there's a
Oh
couple
yeah.
there's a couple of like military airports that got turned into civilian airports. So there's LAX, which is Los Angeles International, which he already would have to fly by that, and they have to be really careful because Los Angeles International is one of the busiest airports on this coast. And so whenever
Holy
you've got
crap! I'm just looking at how many airports you have
oh
in
yeah,
LA.
yeah,
What is this?
because we're only going to talk about 4 airports or 5 airports today, including the one he took off from. And yeah, there's a bunch of them. It's like
Holy cow!
we have a bunch of and they get used. So all of those airports get used. Most of them are being used. So we have where he was going. We have a couple of like commercial airliner airports, so like LAX, and then there's Burbank Airport. So Burbank is another airport that used to be run by a defense company, Lockheed, and got turned into a civilian airport. It's not as busy as LAX, and actually it's the airport I like to fly in and out of because it's way less busy, but it's still busy. The airplanes from that airport fly over me all day long. So yeah, so it's a long-winded way of saying that when you're flying a helicopter from Orange County to Camarillo and you're flying the way they ended up having to fly because of the weather and because you have all these airplanes that are taking off and coming in from the ocean, well, if there's fog that keeps you from flying over the ocean like maybe they would have wanted to do, so they couldn't fly low over the ocean and take the fastest route because there was this fog, this marine layer. And even though we're going to talk about this, the pilot was able to fly in that kind of weather. He wasn't, their company wasn't certified for it, and that's not the way they operated. So helicopters like to generally fly in weather that they can see. So
Makes
that
sense.
was what they were trying. Yeah, that's so they were taking a little bit of a risk on January 26th at 9:06 in the morning.
Oh wow!
When they took off, when he and the pilot and 7 other passengers,
The
including
pilot
his
was
13-year-old
Ara
daughter.
Zoboyan, by the way.
Ara, yep. So Ara, who I have, I think it's worth mentioning. This pilot was apparently Kobe's favorite pilot. They were friends. He'd flown Kobe plenty of times, and this pilot was 50 years old, had flown for this specific company for 10 years, and this pilot was not an amateur. He was a professional's professional. So even though it doesn't look like he was ex-military, which would have been really great, but he had a commercial certificate with helicopter and more importantly, to my theory here, instrument helicopter. So by instrument helicopter, it means that he was certified to be able to fly in weather where he couldn't see. So just flying off of the map and flying off of navigational aids and GPS.
Whoa.
And looking at the instruments.
Whoa, that's
this
crazy.
Yeah, as fact, he was so good at it that he actually had an FAA. So FAA is our federal, I think it's Federal Aviation Administration.
Yeah.
He is our governing body for airplane stuff. He had an instructor certificate for flight, instrument, and ground instruction. So I think this is going to be kind of critical to my theory because he was essentially an expert in flying in what we call IFR, instrument flight rules conditions.
Yeah,
So conditions
I have something like that lined up. Let me just see if I can find it. Yeah, instrument flight rules. So yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna use these 2 different terms, and this is what you've been hearing in the media a lot. So VFR are visual flight rules. So when you are like a beginning pilot and up to a certain skill level, you're flying in conditions where you can see in front of you. There's a certain amount of visibility, and you don't have clouds and things getting in your way, because what happens is when you get stuck in clouds and you can't see, it makes sense that like if you can't see where you're going, A, you might fly into something if you're not very good at flying, and B, it's easy to get disoriented, and this has happened to even very famous and rich people. It's easy if you haven't been trained how to fly in fog, and clouds and things like that, it is easy to get confused and accidentally fly right into the ground, and not even know it, not even know that you were pointed the wrong way,
Or into
or
a mountain, right? That would make
or into
sense.
a mountain, yeah, into a mountain or a hill, or even JFK Jr. So the son of our famous president, they think had something like this happen. He wasn't certified to fly in that kind of weather, and he was in his airplane, and he ended up flying essentially when probably he shouldn't have, and he flew into conditions where he couldn't see, and he ended up upside down and not even knowing it. So that's how
Oh
dangerous it can
wow,
be.
he
Yeah,
he went upside down.
he went upside down, didn't know it, and just and crashed. He just lost control. It's very easy. Things can go wrong very fast in the air, and I
Oh
think, as I'm
wow.
going to point out,
Yeah,
things can go.
he is upside down. I'm just looking at
Oh
real
yeah,
quick
yeah.
from
The
the
the,
images.
the yeah. He ended up not even realizing that he had accident. Because you lose
Whoa,
your
like
visual cues.
that's insane. That's actually insane that you could go upside down in an airplane without even noticing it.
Not even know it, and that's I think what's going to tie into some of what
Holy
people have
cow.
said about this case. A lot of people have made the assumptions that the same thing happened here, but I'm going to argue the opposite. So actually, I think we can probably tee up. We have a video that I found very interesting. So we have a video where somebody used, I think they use X-Plane to simulate the actual flight. And then what happens is we'll go ahead and we'll kind of talk about the flight while it's going on, because it wasn't a very long flight, and we'll skip ahead so it doesn't go too long. But yeah, so at this instructor. Oh, and by the way, this instructor Ara had 8,200 total hours of flight experience, which is a lot. That's like if he was a military pilot, um, that would be a very respectable. That would be like the kind of hourly total you would have after a very long career in the military. And the only people that have hours that are anywhere much higher than that are like commercial airline pilots that are flying coast to coast. Like
Hmm.
they end up with like 20,000 hours because they're flying to New York and back every day. So that's going to kind of pad their hours.
So
But like,
it's like a second nature to them.
yeah, this guy had flying in his blood. So he really was an expert, and he had 1,250 total hours in the S-76 helicopter. So this model, he had a very respectable amount of time, and he could well be considered an expert in this model of helicopter. So, and actually, in fact, he'd even recently, last year, taken tests and been recertified and been found. Uh, 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 he got satisfactory grades
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
not just flying in foggy conditions, even though his company wasn't supposed to be doing that, but and also what's called inadvertent entry into instrument meteorological conditions. So that's a really and it's IIMC for short. So there's IMC, which is instrument meteorological conditions. That's IFR. That's instrument flight rules. That's fog. It means it's all foggy and cloudy and you can't see where you're going. That's what IMC means. And IIMC is when you fly into fog accidentally or when you didn't plan to. So you had a plan. Your plan was you were going to be able to see from point A to point B,
Yeah.
and the weather, the weather gets a vote, and the weather gets the vote that counts, and the weather decided, oh well we're gonna you're gonna you end up. So like this is important because this is one of the leading causes of aviation accidents is people that are not prepared to fly into those kind of conditions. It happens. And when I was researching this, there's
Hmm.
an article which we'll pull up later, where a Navy pilot who was just like this pilot,
Yeah.
trained to do this. He talks about this case, and he talks about how he himself almost had the same exact thing happen to him, only about 30 miles away or so from where this crash happened, where just he lost his bearings. He was in the fog, and he was a professional military pilot, and he almost crashed into a hill. because he ended up in fog when he didn't expect it. So,
Oh yeah,
like,
that's. It seems like it's something that would happen quite, often.
yeah,
Like, yeah,
yeah. I mean, the sky is,
unpredictable.
flying.
1 second
Yeah,
it
yeah.
could, yeah,
Exactly. It's the sky is a crowded place, and the sky is a dangerous place, and flying is dangerous. Even though in many cases flying is still way safer than automobiles because of the professionals doing it. Probably automobiles would also be really safe if there weren't so many of us driving, but there's way
oh
less
yeah,
people flying than driving. But yeah, so what happens is um, they end up having to take a different course this day on the fated day of
yeah.
the flight. So they take off in the morning, and right away they can't do the flying across the ocean thing. They're going to have to fly across a good portion of Los Angeles in the fog, and it was so foggy that day that both the sheriff and the Los Angeles Police Department had grounded their helicopters. So they told the helicopters. That makes
Yeah,
sense because the helicopters for the sheriff and LAPD, those aren't really they're not there to transport somebody. They're there to see stuff from the sky. So if they can't see anything, it
there's
doesn't
no
make
point. Like, it
yeah. What
doesn't
are we doing?
serve. Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't serve any purpose to have them up in the air.
Yeah, yeah, it's just making things dangerous. So as much as the police department likes having those helicopters and they are really useful, they're like, why do it? So that's been pointed out, but I'll point out that they weren't transporting anybody, but this was a helicopter pilot who, on paper, should have been well qualified even to do a more dangerous flight. But as you can see from this video we're watching, which is I think a pretty good simulation of what was going on, it was foggy. And not only was it foggy, but their new course was going to take them across some very busy airspaces. So they already had to move well east of LAX to not get in the way of the airliners, because the airliners almost always fly in from the east into LAX, and then they take off over the water when they take off again. So
Just a quick question, because we have been watching
yeah.
this video for a while. You see that little zigzag in the trajectory of the helicopter? Like, what's that all about? Did they just circle
So
around?
so the swirly part, yep. So that's perfect timing. So what happened was, they needed to fly across where I live, which is the valley. So the valley is this big bowl enclosed by mountains, and the biggest airport in the valley is the Burbank Airport, and that has a lot of flights, at least during the day, coming in and out of it. So, and those
I
are
see.
real airliners, and also not just airliners, but private planes, plenty of those. And then, wouldn't you know, not even that far from Burbank, so close that when I used to take the train, the distance was only maybe 7 minutes between one airport and the other on the train.
Mhm.
There's another airport called Van Nuys, and even though that airport doesn't do commercial air flights, it does something like 1,700 to 2,000 flights a week from private airplanes and helicopters, including some very wealthy folks. So often, when you think of famous people in Los Angeles, if they're rich enough, if they're like an Arnold Schwarzenegger or someone like that, they may either own their own plane or pool their money with other celebrities to lease a plane. Or if they're like the president of Warner Brothers or something, they'll take an airplane out of that airport. That's what kind of airport that is. So if you're like the rich guys on Entourage, you'll actually see in some of the Entourage episodes, they're leaving in a private plane from Van Nuys Airport. So there's these two airports that are right in the middle of the valley, and they have all this traffic. So that means that anybody flying through the valley now has to watch out for that. So what happened was, because of both the fog and all the air traffic that was going on, and the way they were having to already disrupt sort of normal operations and be more careful, they had to tell this helicopter to wait. This helicopter had to basically circle around for a while until the time was right, until they got permission to do what was called VFR. So before they were flying under VFR, and as you can see, it's not very good
Yeah.
VFR, right? The fog is just light enough that they can kind of see, but
Something, yeah,
it's
but not that far into the distance.
it's not good, and it's already questionable. Like there were maybe they should have called it a day and rented a car to go to the game, but they didn't.
I feel
So
like just I want to make
yeah,
like some comments here. I wonder what the stress level in that cockpit was when they were circling around the valley, because to me it just seems like if I was in that airplane and if I was calling the shots, I would probably just said let's just land somewhere
Eh,
and call it a day. But at the same time, maybe this was Kobe Bryant. He probably wasn't in similar situations before, and everything always went well. And obviously, the captain, he was a complete elite expert. So maybe they were
yeah.
like just another day at the office type of situation. But for me, it just seemed like when they were circling in the valley, I'd probably be like, "Yo, let's call it a day." You know what I mean?
And the interesting part is because I think you're right that like you probably had a really high trust level in the pilot, and the pilot had a high trust level in his abilities. If at this point, if they had either landed at Burbank or Van Nuys Airport and just gotten an Uber, a nice Uber,
like
like a like
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 a
like a like a
celebrity
like
Uber.
yeah, or a limousine rental or whatever it was, which I'm sure they could have gotten pretty quickly, especially for him. Like any kind of limo company would have jumped at that and had a limo right there. If they landed either of those airports, the drive is actually not that long. Like I said, it's only about half an hour from there. So they're only at this
All
point
right.
risking their lives flying further to save about 15 minutes because to go from where they were near and just land and then get it would have taken a little bit of time, but they would have still been on time for the game. So that's just in
Okay.
hindsight
Okay.
kind of
Okay.
an unfortunate thing that like when it started getting a little bit rough here, if they could have just gone and landed at Van Nuys and just changed the plans, I think they would have been fine. And in fact,
Mm-hmm.
Van Nuys would have been almost just as good to land at as maybe he didn't know this, but as Camarillo. But okay, that's not what happened. So they finally get permission, and actually, what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to fly up the 5 freeway, past the airport, the Burbank airport. So the
Mm-hmm.
Burbank airport's going to be on their west, and they're going to basically fly around the northern edge of the valley. They're kind of making like a big U-turn almost, and then
Okay.
so they're flying past the Burbank airport, and then they're gonna go along the northern edge. They're gonna go west along the northern edge of the valley, and
Mm-hmm.
then they're gonna turn south, so that because they also have to pass the Van Nuys airport,
Yeah.
and then they go around all these airports the long way, and then they even pass my house in the process, and me, me,
Whoa.
me and like everybody else in the valley, um, and then and they
Did
kind
you
of
saw
like
the
fly.
play? Did you saw the helicopter
No,
when
no,
it
I
passed
was
your
I
house?
was I was I was sleeping. I was knocked out from a late night, but
Okay.
yeah, I mean, and they even fly near my parents' house at this point. So yeah, so they go and they, this they were at this point they were under what's called special VFR. So special VFR is the kind of VFR you're in where you end up flying near some busy airports, and you're getting instructions like ordinarily under VFR you don't even really need to be in contact with anybody. Like you could be in VFR, and sometimes actually, in fact, like when you have airplanes that are flying under IFR, like the tower is basically the air traffic controllers are just basically making sure that the IFR people don't get in the way of the VFR people, because the VFR people are only supposed to be at a certain altitude level, if that makes sense. So it's like
It's
you
it's getting
almost
quite complicated, but it does
it's
make sense. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you know what it is it's almost like these little kids are there in their tricycles, and you've got a motorcycle, and the kids in the tricycles are just going to be on the sidewalk, and you're on like the highway.
Well, that's a good way of simplifying things right there.
Yeah, but now unfortunately, because they end up having to go this different route, now they're kind of going, they were like the tricycle, but now because they're going near the road, now it's like they're like a tricycle that has to cross the street. So that's what's going on here is now like they do have to talk on the radio to these different airports. So first Glendale slash Burbank, as they call it Burbank Airport,
Yeah,
Bob Hope Airport,
just because
and then
just to not get in the way of like
yeah,
other aircrafts.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It's because you've got Southwest Airlines and all these other big airlines coming through.
Oh,
You've
yeah.
got expensive like Learjets and Gulfstreams and all this stuff coming through. So like yeah, and that on top of every other little tiny plane and that's coming through that area. So okay, so they're doing it. So they're flying, and then at some point they get, and we're getting right to that point where they go down south to Woodland Hills, which is my hometown. Woodland Hills is right adjacent to the famous Calabasas. Now, Calabasas is now famous for two different reasons.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there we go, Ventura Freeway West. So here they are. They're flying right near where where I grew up, and they're gonna essentially follow the freeway at this point. So at this point, the tower is still a little. They're getting out of the area that the tower controls, but the tower is a little bit concerned for them because the visibility, and they know this because there's cameras and there's tools
Mm-hmm.
that they use to judge the weather. They're flying into some hills. These are some low hills. When I measured it on Google Earth, it looked like the hills were about 1,900 feet,
Okay.
and their altitude. And we're going to actually look at this later on a different that same AirNav thing. Their altitude is actually below the tops of those hills when they start, but
Okay.
as they get into kind of like almost like a canyon, they're starting to get out of the valley and into these hills, these foothills.
I can barely see anything, you know.
Yeah, it's getting foggier and foggier. So actually, if we want to just pause it, let's
Yeah.
pause it right there. So what happened? Here's what happened. Here's what I was reading another article was pointing out.
Okay.
What happened was it was getting foggier and foggier,
Mm-hmm.
and because of the hills, even the hills are getting in the way of the radar for them to even be tracked. So, and then on top of it,
Jesus, this sounds like it's a bad idea to continue this flight. Like the more you describe it, like the crazier it gets.
yeah, I mean, this is where I think, and it almost makes you wonder if this is what was going on. At this point, it would have been a good idea to say, you know what, Plan B, Van Nuys Airport is only 5 minutes behind us. Let's make a U-turn. Let's land there. We get a limousine. We arrive at probably the same time anyway in Newbury Park, which is really not that far away at that point, and everyone goes home happy. But what instead happened is, and then here's the other thing, is because the hills are kind of in the way, and they're in the way of the radar even, and then like they weren't even supposed to be on the radio with the tower, but because they're having to fly higher because of the fog, now they do need to like try to do what's called flight following and talk to the towers of these different airports, and these airports kind of have like overlapping thing. And apparently there was even some confusion because there was one person from Van Nuys or from the air traffic control that was kind of steering this helicopter around, and then someone else took over. And as was pointed out in one of our source articles,
Yeah.
sometimes just like there's enough of a difference between helicopters and airplanes and how they act that could be a problem. That just the person could kind of forget
Mm-hmm.
that they're dealing with a helicopter. Just there's it's really busy here, and
Yeah.
and being busy is one of those things that overloads air traffic controllers, and they sometimes make mistakes. But I'm not saying they made a mistake here, but it was a lot of things that happened at once.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
okay, so what happens here is, and this is where I think that a lot of the confusion is. So if you could just rewind this video by about 10 seconds, what happens is he starts gaining a lot of altitude, and when we look at the AirNav thing, you'll see how much altitude he gained, but he gained a lot. It kind of was like the version. It was like, it would
It
almost,
does seem like he's getting higher a little bit, from like the little edge of like the scenery that I could see. He was gaining ground, yeah.
and when you look on the chart, at least according to the maps that they have, because unfortunately that's all we have is the radar. It looks like he tried to gain at about here. Just pause it right here. He tried to gain about 900 feet or so
Mm-hmm.
in a very very short period of time. In fact, when you look at the whole track of this flight on a graph, this is the most altitude he tried to gain the entire flight.
Do we
So
have
the rest of the flight,
graph?
yeah, we have it on the AirNav thing. That's the second AirNav one.
Let me just
The next
find it.
tab, sorry. The last tab you have there.
You're talking about this
That
one?
one. There was one before it. There was a one. It's AirNav here. If you go,
Oh man,
it's
wait. It's probably this one. I'll just quickly on cloud.
Sorry, FlightAware. The FlightAware one that's like the live flight. I want to get to. Right.
Yeah, you could like get it to me through Skype, and I can.
Yeah, let me Skype it. Here it goes. So it's this one. So what happens is if you look at it, it's a very dramatic change in altitude. And the article I'm reading is saying that, you know what he's probably trying to do is he knows the clouds end at a certain point. And it looks like even though he's going to kind of break the rules, because to be in this VFR, you're supposed to be under a certain level. There you go. And if you scroll down there, if you scroll down, like, you see that thing? So you see that blue line? Look
Blue
at that
line.
blue line.
Blue line.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. See the graph right in front of you there, the white line and the blue line. So
I'm missing the blue line, man. I don't know why.
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just
green and yellow.
Oh, green. Okay, sorry. You know what? It's my monitor.
Oh, yeah.
It's doing the save my eyes thing for the daylight. So like, you see how that line, the green one, goes straight up.
Oh yeah.
So, just as a note, once again, I'm not a pilot, but I know when I when I do helicopters on my video games, on my simulators, trying to give the helicopter a lot of gas at once is not a super great thing. So helicopters aren't like airplanes or cars. We're like, if you're in your car and you slam your foot down on the accelerator, you might stress the engine. I guess you could blow the engine, but like most of the time your car will just skid out a little bit and then it'll go a lot faster. And same thing for an airplane. An airplane, you can push the throttles all the way to 100%, and it'll start getting faster. Like, it won't necessarily break anything most of the time. Helicopters, and I've always said this, I don't really trust helicopters. Helicopters, depending on the helicopter, you can blow the engine, or you can do something to the engine that'll freak it out, because it'll try. Sometimes there's like computerized stuff now that will try to protect the engine and will unfortunately shut it down. So that's one of the things I kind of wonder. Even though they say, hey, when they looked at the crash site, they didn't think that anything had happened to the engine, but they were only able to kind of check against one kind of mechanical failure. They weren't able to check against everything. So that's where I get into this. So the reason why I say this is, it looks like he was trying to break through. He was busy, so he wasn't really talking on the radio, because he didn't have a co-pilot. He was by himself, the pilot, and he was having to do a lot of things at once. This is also one of the dangerous things, is that especially when you're piloting solo, there's a lot of things to manage, and that's one of the known dangers as well. Is you can get so preoccupied trying to like change the radio to the right frequency, because you're changing frequencies all the time for different air control areas, and you're trying to fly the helicopter, and it's already, like you said, a very nerve-wracking situation, even though he's an expert. And then he's having to think about these hills that are right around them. So I think his thought was, hey, let's gain some altitude, let's poke above these clouds, and if we need to switch into IFR flight, so be it. I mean, yeah, they'll probably get in a little bit of trouble with the government, because like that's not the plan they filed, but nobody wants them to crash, right? Especially not Kobe. Nobody wants Kobe Bryant's helicopter to crash, and if the company has to pay a fine or get their hand slapped a little bit by the government, like, hey, you weren't really supposed to be doing this kind of flight, so be it. But
be it, yeah. I mean, it's
yeah,
Kobe.
Safety first, right? Yeah. For anybody, I mean, this is a tragedy, and we don't have a lot of crashes like this around here. So anyways, what happens is, and we'll see in the video, something very strange happens. So it looks like right as he gets too near where he would have broken out of the clouds, the helicopter suddenly goes into a very wide turn. And we have another, after we watch this, we're going to look at it from another article, but you can see this is the part that bothers me. I have yet to hear this explained, how this happens. And what we can do is go ahead and bring up that the article from, I think it's the Popular Science one. We have a picture from Popular Science. I have a popsci.com article, and it has.
I have my ad blocker on. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
Give me 1 second. Let me just.
Because I think what bothers me is, so far from all the experts, and from real experts, not me, not not Glenn who likes to play in his computer and thinks he knows something, but
Yeah.
like I mean,
Yeah.
let's be fair. From all the experts, they said they looked at the fog situation and the IIMC situation, so the inadvertent entry into instrument or meteorological conditions where accidentally flying into fog, let's call it. They looked at that and they said, oh, you know what, that's what happens all the time. People, they get into fog and they lose their bearings and they crash right into a mountain or something like that. And then, so what bothers me about that is, A, this guy is an expert and he's flown in the area before, so I don't think that he would have been surprised. But here's the other thing is this big crazy left turn that we saw him do, and there's that one picture, I think, in this article. Scroll down a little bit, there's a chart that kind of shows like the path of it going right.
Are you talking about?
Yeah. Actually, go a little higher again. Go higher. So right there, that's a perfect example. So that, I think, is an excellent illustration of what happened. So here you can see kind of the top of that big massive climb, right? So we saw him do that big altitude gain, and there he is, and he's starting to turn. Well, and that's, I guess this is the question is, up until he makes a crazy left turn into the hills.
Oh yeah.
And it's not like the hills were close at this point. At this point, he is a good 900 feet above the top of these mountains.
Yeah. It definitely seems like he has some good ground above the buildings, but then he starts to, like decrease in height.
And here's the thing: if from my point of view,
okay,
the theories that everybody keeps saying that he got confused in the fog and he accidentally steered into the hill. That doesn't make sense to me, given what we know about, because the altitude changed. So here's just to set perspective.
Yeah.
The operating speed, the top operating speed of this thing is 150 knots. Once you get past that, you start potentially damaging the aircraft or actually losing the ability for the helicopter rotors to actually cut into the air. And the altitude change was somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 feet per minute. Now, for perspective, that's
a lot.
Yes, it's a lot. It is actually 8 times faster than the safe speed to change altitude in that helicopter, especially decreasing altitude. It is like you're crashing. So and what I don't understand when the experts say, oh, he got confused in the fog, is he has instruments in his helicopter that show him which way is up, and he knows how to use them. He knows how to. He's not going to lose track of which way is up.
Holy
because
cow.
These instruments tell you which way is up. That's the whole point of these instruments, is so that when this happens, when you end up in fog, you know which way is up and which way is forward, and you don't get confused. Nobody in this helicopter. Like here's the thing: when JFK Jr. accidentally turned upside down and crashed in conditions that were foggy, it's because he didn't feel it. It's because it happens so slowly that you don't actually realize what is going on until it happens. This is like a roller coaster. This is like they were probably all screaming and crapping their pants at this point. And in fact, one of the witnesses on this hill where he crashed said that like the thing came in pretty fast and it was turning so hard that he, from the side of the hill, could see the bottom of the helicopter as it was turning left. So he was somewhere,
Whoa, that's crazy. That's
right.
That doesn't seem like, now that you put it that way, definitely doesn't sound like a calculated U-turn.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like a calculated turn that accidentally went too low. It doesn't sound like somebody that was confused in the fog. To me, it sounds like somebody who's having a legitimate flight issue and is so busy trying to save the helicopter and everyone else in it that he doesn't even have time to get on the radio to tell air traffic control that he's about to die. So to me, that's somebody who is just struggling to control the aircraft because something went massively wrong right there at the top of the climb. So right when he was about to fix his problem and get above the clouds, something went wrong. Now, I have a couple theories. One theory is that when he did that big altitude surge in a 30-year-old airplane, and mind you, this is the B model. of the Sikorsky 76. So if you look on Wikipedia, you can actually see the C and D models, which came after this. They essentially, by the time you got to the D model, it has about twice the horsepower. So for whatever reason, they decided that by the time they got to the D model, they had massively increased the amount of power that these engines had. Now, I say that because there are conditions where you can either overstress the engine, or you can not have enough power for the conditions you're in to hold a hover or otherwise do what you're doing. Now, he wasn't trying to hover here, obviously, but it's important to note that if you look at, when I was doing research, I said, there's been a bunch of crashes, and there's only been about, I think, 4 or 5 crashes of this model of helicopter ever, including the Calabasas crash. And one of them was in fog with much less experienced pilots. And a couple others had to do with engine failure. Now, the investigators initially said, from what they could see in the wreckage, it did not look like, just the kind of evidence that they saw, it did not look like there was necessarily an engine failure. But in the articles that I've read, they pointed out, hey, if there was something like a double engine failure, which is admittedly rare, but could happen, it wouldn't necessarily show up. And then the other thing is, if you had what's called a bird strike, so a bird strike when you literally hit a bird, that it would happen is it could hit the engine, and the engine could go into restart mode.
Yeah, I've heard about those things happening. Yeah.
Right, where a bird goes through the windshield or something. It doesn't look like they have that, but whatever reason. So there could be something where it hits the engine and maybe made both of them fail, and then that could cause a big steep dive like that. Now one of a Navy pilot who was in another article that we used for our research from the Drive, he said that the rate of descent, the only time he ever did a rate of descent that fast, went down that fast, 4,000, 5,000 feet per minute, was when he did auto rotation. So auto rotation is kind of like the helicopter version of gliding. So for helicopters, they don't really glide like airplanes, but their version of it is if the engine goes out, they can kind of try to let the propellers that are still kind of spinning, try to slow them down and hope that when they land, they don't, die, which, like if you're doing it from too high, you might still die, or if you're not able to really perfectly pull it off. So that to me is a clue. So okay, that's one thing. The other thing is I wanted to show a real quick video, because it's like, why that turn to the left? Why that sudden turn to the left? And what I found this interesting video. It wasn't at all about the Kobe thing. But what this video is there was a helicopter that wanted, if you just back it up slightly a little bit, there was a helicopter that wanted to land on this beach, and he was deciding that he was going to just hover over the water. And what he didn't realize, that the person that made this video pointed out, he's an instructor, he pointed out that just for whatever reason, the altitude and other things, the helicopter's rotor, so the little thing spinning on the back of the helicopter, that's the tail rotor. Yeah. The tail rotor, because the main engine, so the main rotor, wasn't getting enough, it didn't have enough power because of the just the altitude and other stuff going on, and the forward speed of the helicopter, because it didn't have enough power to keep the helicopter up, because they run off of the same motor. There's just a bunch of gears that put the engine power to that other thing. It starts spinning because the tail rotor the tail rotor's there to keep it from spinning like that, because when you only have one big propeller atop the rotor, there's a natural tendency for the helicopter to spin the other way. It's just mechanics. So that little,
it makes sense. It makes perfect.
You know what I mean?
Perfect sense.
That little thing there is just spin it. It's just to push against that. So and then there's actually there's actually a Russian helicopter. There's a couple Russian helicopter models that have two propellers up top, and then they don't need the tail rotor. But anyway, I mentioned that because when I watched that, I was like, maybe that explains why that big turn was happening, because the engine was failing. So then the tail rotor was also failing, which would make that crazy curve. So you're trying to control two things, right? Like you've lost your power, you're starting to crash, and now the friggin' thing is turning into a mountain. So you don't even get to try to crash it on the freeway. You're trying to crash it. You're trying to like not hit the hill, which was a failure. Now, here's the other thing is when you, in this model, and I looked this up in the manual for the helicopter, in this model helicopter, there's something called overspeed. So I mentioned the top speed of this thing is 150 knots. And when you look at that chart we were looking at, it hit at least 160 knots. One of the things that happens with this model helicopter, this is that when it hits what's called an overspeed condition, to protect itself, the engine, it will actually shut down one of the two engines, which seems like not a good thing, right? Because it's like, okay, I already don't have enough power, right? So I guess the theory was, someone's just pedal to the metaling it and going straight, and then they overspeed it. So to protect the helicopter, we're going to keep the person from doing that. So maybe they pull back on the stick, and which would make sense if you weren't crashing. But if you're crashing and need every bit of power from your engine you could get, especially if something happened to the other engine, that seems like a bad thing. Now, I don't know. I've still, seems like initially they didn't think that this happened, but I can't help but wonder if there was a way where both of the engines could have had that triggered. It's actually a computer setting, so it's not like a mechanical thing. It's like a microchip. Yeah, a microchip goes off and goes, turn off the engine, and then you have to actually reset the engine. You have to wait.
So how do you get out of that situation if this is all happening when you're flying?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing: is I feel like it may have been a lose-lose situation suddenly. So he thought, he was doing the right thing, and I don't know. Like I say, I look at that graph and I get suspicious because it was so much power at once, and I know, especially for a 30-year-old aircraft, that seems like maybe that this is the time where even your car transmission and motor at some point have a lifetime value, and some of the other crashes that happened, it was because for this model helicopter, it had to do with parts either of the engine or the parts that connected the propeller to the engine that failed. Now, they said that didn't happen here, but they said it awfully fast. It was pretty early. It was like they looked at the pieces, and what pieces were left of people and machine, they looked at it and said, well, we don't think that happened. But I can't help but wonder, gosh, this happened right after he really revved that engine high and tried to gain a lot of altitude, and then all of a sudden he's crashing. Is that a coincidence after he was flying in fog fine for the entire flight? So and then you look at the rate of descent, whatever happened, to me it looks like, for whatever reason, I mean, maybe he had a heart attack, who knows, maybe he had a stroke, maybe a bee flew into the cockpit, maybe a bird hit the helicopter, they don't know, or hit the engine. Something made him lose control of the aircraft in a way that the thing plowed right into the hill, not just in like a confused, bumbling way.
Yeah.
And he would have seen that, right?
Holy crap.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it really looks like, he, and I've driven past this part very often, and they are admittedly
this exact hill crashing spot.
Yes. It's actually on the way. For me, when I drive to the family that the part of my family that lives in Malibu, that I have I do Thanksgiving and stuff like that with. Yeah. It's sort of the scenic route. So yeah. I mean, this exact hill. These hills, they are a little bit steep, but they're not that high. So you wouldn't want to walk straight up it, but you could. But but they're not. You could, you and I, Juras, if you ever come, maybe we'll walk up it, and it'll take us maybe 10, 20 minutes.
I need to do that, yeah.
Make the pilgrimage here. Yeah. So that's the part that I think I'm very frustrated by, and you can probably hear it in my voice. I'm a little more passionate about this case. Is that, to me, and I feel like maybe this is going to be borne out, for the kind of pilot he was and the level of experience he had, and given all the other things we know about him and the weather and what seems to have happened at the end of this flight, to me it doesn't look like the mystery and the solution that I see is that and there's once again, this isn't assigning blame.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah. I mean, we,
Yeah.
we did point out like some things could have gone better, and in hindsight, some other decisions look better. But I don't know that like this is necessarily the pilot's fault. Like I feel like the machine may have failed him, and as much as like maybe Sikorsky or the manufacturers or the leasing company don't want to hear that because maybe it seems like it was in great repair. I mean, just things happen. Airplanes break for reasons that are not anybody's fault. Just the metal met its point where it could not sustain the stress, or the wrong bird hit the wrong aircraft at the wrong time. I mean, something like that. Where
Yeah. Yeah.
to me it looks like the aircraft
Hmm.
totally failed him, and that's why he plummeted at such a fast descent rate and did things that just don't make sense, but especially don't make sense for that, like, oh, he got confused in the fog
Oh
reason. And I
yeah. I
think that's,
mean,
yeah,
I just have to say that this was an excellent breakdown, like of your point of view, because this is definitely not what what my preconceptions about this case was. Once I had like the casual information from the news. Yeah, no one was really saying things like the things that you've said about the aircraft potentially having some sort of issues. Not necessarily that this was the pilot's fault, because you made a great case for the aircraft malfunctioning, because the pilot was in fact an elite pilot. Like you probably can't find anyone who has a better resume than this guy right here. So
yeah. I mean, they would have to be like, I mean, even helicopter pilots from the military would be very respectful of the amount of hours. I mean, he would be like a senior pilot if he were coming from the military with 85, 80, 8,200 hours in helicopters. That's like a career. That's like a 20, 25 year career in flying aircrafts in the
yeah.
military. So it's and especially for helicopters. Before we kind of wrap it up, I think the other quick thing I want to address is I've seen a lot of like what we call Monday morning quarterbacking. So a lot of like, oh, they should have had this and should have had that. Where okay, a couple things. So apparently the rules are for the FAA is that even when they spot something like a piece of safety equipment that they wish an aircraft would have, I guess because it's expensive and aircraft owners don't want to be constantly shelling out for things all the time, and there's kind of like, unfortunately, a little bit of like putting up with some level of risk. So the things that I've seen pointed out, which it does seem unfortunate that this aircraft did not have what's called a FDR, which is a flight data recorder. So it's basically it's the black box.
Oh yeah, the black box. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that just for our listeners that don't know anything about airplanes, it's like a little recorder that just literally writes what was going on with all the instruments, what they were saying, what the computers were saying, etc. When the aircraft, well, if it crashes, when it crashed, or when it didn't crash, and it's like you can go and take that and try to reconstruct.
It's made in a way that it almost always survives the actual crash, right? So you could
Yeah,
like
yeah.
actually see the logs, what was happening. I mean, how I found out about the black box was because of all of the major passenger airliners that crashed over the years. They always start looking for the black box immediately, right?
Yeah, it's a very robust piece of equipment, and it's just invaluable for doing
Right. So
this kind of.
this aircraft did not have it.
Yeah, it turns out that this aircraft was exempt. It was an older model aircraft, and just for different. I mean, it's kind of controversial to look at it. You can kind of find a lot of arguing back and forth, and sort of the people that make the rules. But yep, didn't have that, and it also didn't have what's called a CVR, which is a cockpit voice recorder. So that once again would have like recorded what was going on in the
Oh
aircraft.
my
So
God! Like,
like,
how do you not have that?
yeah, I mean, once again, I mean, it makes you wonder if the rules are going to change when someone so important and valuable, as well as the other passengers who were also valuable people to their own families and to their own
Of course.
coworkers. Yeah, I mean, because that's another piece of evidence where if the guy goes, "Oh, my heart," well, then maybe he had a heart attack, and then unfortunately he was the only one that could fly the
I
aircraft.
feel
So
like
if
that
he's
that should be installed in every aircraft. I think
yeah, yeah,
that would answer a lot of questions.
I mean, I even have I have a camera in my car. Like I have they're not expensive. They're under $20.
Yeah.
Like I have a dash cam in my car, just for reasons like that. And then finally, here's the one thing that I've kind of seen back and forth. Kind of my final thing I wanted to address was, there's a system that's like called a terrain awareness warning system. So it's something that would like blare out warnings and things like that to you. It kind of it's tied into, I guess, various instruments, and it would essentially force you to. I mean, you see this with military jets a lot, especially the ones I play in my games. But yeah, I mean, it's something that kind of tells you when you're about to crash.
Oh yeah.
And the counter argument I've seen for why most helicopters don't have this is because helicopters are almost always flying around buildings and around hills and really close to things,
Yeah.
where
Makes
that
sense.
that
Yeah.
that stupid thing would be going off all the time. And if
Yes.
it's going off too much, then you're not going to pay attention to it anyway. So it would be a distraction, in fact, they say,
Well,
for a lot of these
maybe it could
helicopters.
start like maybe you could turn it on when you're not flying in like
That there's conditions.
yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
when you're like flying in the hills or something like that. It would be very useful actually.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of back and forth about. I mean, for small airplanes and stuff like that, for sure, because airplanes, like, they are not as nimble as helicopters, so for sure they need to know if they're about to hit a skyscraper or a hill or something. Helicopters, because they can kind of, they can fly forwards and backwards and up and down. Yeah, the argument is, especially in a city like Los Angeles where you're flying around. I mean, it's been so awesome. Sometimes I'll be here. I've been downtown and seen like military helicopters flying between like skyscrapers and stuff, like Ospreys and Cobra helicopters and stuff. So awesome. But it's
Yeah.
like, for them, it's like they don't need that thing blaring
Like
in
from the
their ear.
Godzilla movies and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's like real life. It's amazing. But yes, that's the other thing I've seen is I've seen, like, once again, a lot of pat answers where it's like, well, if it wasn't for the fog and if it wasn't for them not having the TAWS, the terrain awareness system, this would have never happened. And I'm like, I don't believe that. I really think that
Yeah.
this pilot, did everything he could, other than, maybe second guessing the whole flight plan. I think he probably tried to do a really good job and did a really good job until something else failed him. And I don't, including maybe his health, but that, once again, like that isn't
Yeah.
on him.
Yeah.
I mean, he's had to have medical tests just like any pilot has. So yeah, so that's I think my long-winded. Thank you for everybody that listened to my long-winded spiel. But I'm pretty passionate about this topic, and I'm really interested to see what the final investigation will find.
I mean, this was excellent from you. I mean, I had a very good time like discussing this with you, and I can definitely tell that this was something you looked into thoroughly, and yeah, you gave us some really, really interesting information about the whole case, and yeah, wow, you actually blown my mind. Like I didn't really think that much of the whole like crash, the actual crash. I just had like a preconception in my head that this was probably it was a crash. A crash is a crash, and it was a crash. But I never actually thought about it in depth, and this was actually a really, really cool breakdown that you did. And yeah, wow, like I'm actually gonna probably do some more research after we wrap this up. So thanks again for such an amazing I guess experience listening to this whole as you worded spiel, but it was actually really, really cool and interesting, man. That was good.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate all the heavy lifting you did on this, especially talking about Kobe, because I think you really are our show's expert on basketball. So
Well,
I
yeah, well,
appreciate
thanks.
your patience as I sort of
No, man, like
sort of
I
ranted my way
was
through this.
super interested. Like this was, I might actually come back to this episode and, and listen it again just for my own like pleasure. So yeah, I mean, this was really cool. I mean, if you want to like add anything before we sign off, because it has been one of our longer episodes, but it was definitely worth making it long, because like all the details we could not cover them sub 1 hour. This had to be like an hour and a half plus type of a podcast. So yeah, anything you want to add, because I feel like we should be cutting it
Yeah,
yeah.
I was having so much fun. I think I didn't even realize how long it went. Yeah, so thank you to everybody that made it this far, and thank you for all your subscriptions. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. We've been seeing a record amount of signups, so it's really it's the kind of feedback that really makes us feel good about what we're doing, and keeps our level of enthusiasm high for tackling each one of these mysteries.
Yep, no doubt. Guys, this was episode number 31. Now, for episode 32, we are actually thinking of doing something a little bit different, maybe. I'm not sure if we're going to be starting a second show or not. We will discuss this after the episode or something like that. But for the next, I guess, piece of content that we produce, it's going to be another coronavirus update. So it's going to be oh gosh, like a quick note. Our last coronavirus update, I made it seem like it was a casual virus, but oh boy, was I wrong, because coronavirus has actually hit my home country, Lithuania. So we have a case in Lithuania. So it's I'm in the front lines as well with I'm sure a lot of our listeners who live in countries that have been affected as well, and I'm really interested to discussing the coronavirus once again. So that episode should be coming out shortly as well. And yeah, once again, guys, thanks for listening, and catch us on the next episode. Stay safe and peace out.